Hello, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the World One System Manifesto, which is kind of like, well, partially it's the elevator pitch for the game, but also it helps determine the design goals for the system. It's the very first thing that was designed, and everything else was designed around it. Um, should explain the difference really between the elevator pitch and design goals. One flows from the other. Now, I think it's in terms of game design thinking, it's long been thought to be best practice to set a series of clear design goals when you're setting out any system. And the success of a system is really based on two things. One is the appropriateness of their design goals, and secondly is how close you came to meeting them. Because we have seen in some emerging TTRPGs jumping around radically between one variant of a system and another. Now, that is not necessarily a bad thing if um, your design goals and your means of achieving them, your methodology is inappropriate. But what it perhaps does show, it would be better if you'd set out those design goals and your design methodology in advance, not mentioning any names. Now, let's go to this document here. It's on our website. It's also in chapter 1 of the book. Here we go. We'll zoom in. Here we go. Now, just to demonstrate the difference between a design goal and these kind of design objectives. The first uh, uh, point in the manifesto here is fun and fast to play. Yes, great, but how? So a design goal is really how you put that into practice. Now, one of the things, the main way in which the Shatterheart system achieves that is its central game mechanic. And one of the key principles of its central game mechanic is roll one, ROLE one, but it's a pun, also ROLL one, in that you roll once in any one turn for any one player, and you reuse that roll, and that elimination completely of multi attacks and replacement mechanics for multi attacks are the way in which the design goal is achieved. So, two game mechanics follow from that. One is the elimination of multi attacks, and secondly, an alternative system for higher level characters to achieve higher damage and hit more often in play. Um, so there are quite a small number of key game mechanics, but they all follow from this system manifesto. And the second point is openness, both tabletop and digital. So yes, we want to make the system open source, so we're releasing it under the Creative Commons license. But not just that, we also want to release the underlying database for building online tools under an open source license as well. And we're the first to do this. Some emerging TTRPG systems are quite explicit in their licenses that you cannot build a character builder because that's seen as a source of revenue, etc. So we want to make sure that it's in the hands of the players, and particularly PDFs. We want digital PDFs where you can cut and paste text out of them, print off individual pages without watermarks, make it have hyperlinks, not just scanned um, bitmaps, so you can't select the task. That's no use to anybody. It's just excessive monetization, which doesn't achieve its goal because people get fed up and don't buy those things. Um, the third is a full system for long-term play. Because it seems now that there are a number of systems that neatly fill the block of the kind of BECMI basic starter set, approach, but many players um, want to have highly customizable characters and are invested in those characters, so they don't want them to be completely disposable, as they are in many in systems like um, Daggerheart, for example. I mean, no criticism of Daggerheart; it's a great system, but I think will be people that um, want to move on to something where they can customize characters and it's suitable for multiple long-term campaigns. Um, and following on from these is to be the system of choice, disrupting the market leader. We don't just want to fill a specialist niche or be a fort which is a little bit better. uh, we feel it's like the difference, between Windows and Linux in the sense if you're fed it with Windows, you want to go for something different. You want to go with something open source from the outset, not just something that's a tweak. And that there are good systems that have come out, such as Tales of the Valiant and Level Up system, but they're minor forks relatively from fifth edition. And this is a fork, but as we say, it's a fork from the future, in that it much more radically changes the game's math, because most of the problems result from the game's math. And the only way you can change that game's math is to break completely with 5e compatibility. So there's absolutely no way in a million years in which you'll see 5e compatibility on the front of our system. And because of that, we have to be insurgent. We have to replace. We're not just adding. We're not building off. People have to say, okay, this is a better system. We're moving to it, rather than saying, okay, well, you can just play this with your characters and your monsters you've already got, etc. No, we're fixing everything, which requires us to be much more ambitious in a sense. It has to be a full fat replacement for everything, suitable for campaigns, suitable for the many, many different types of play, from grimdark to high fantasy to low fantasy to historical gaming that people want to play. Um, and we think the priority of players is good classes, because the number one complaint, initially with the 2014 Dungeons and Dragons, was some of the classes are weak, like the Ranger, for example, or the or structural problems like Paladin, or just weak like the Monk. Um, so we really wanted to, for each of the classes, and we'll come onto this in future videos, say what's the epitomatic features of the classic features of each class, and how do we make them better. The next principle is the cloud pleasing fantasy TPRG favorites you expect. So we do have raptor bears, which are more IP free. I don't, they don't own the copyright of owl bears. The vulture bears are in Michael Moorcock. So raptor bears are an old idea we've brought back, and we've got half a dozen different types of raptor bears. So the various fan favourites. The Displacer Beast was in Vance, so I think there's almost nothing um, um, WotC have the outright IP for. They claim they have the IP for Gith Yankee, but they were in Fiend Folio. They were third-party content. How could you claim? Anyway. If there are IP problems, we'll just fix them. Like, we've changed the names of some things, but mainly because we've didn't like the original names, rather than and reserved IP we've stayed clear of. We've got alternatives to all of that. The next point is fixing D20 with no dead turns and long waits. We haven't gone with the approach of automatically hitting on every turn, because I think that's just a fudge. Um, we need to, particularly with Gen Z, understand that failure happens, but get back on your feet. Next turn, you'll have another chance. So to have turns go quickly, and still be able to do things off turn and at the end of your turn to try and rectify the situation. So you're not just sitting there in an off turn. The game is highly tactical, so you can be plotting with yourself and others. Okay, how do we do a combo? Nothing broken. Many things are broken in the Anfasand game, the market leader. Many things. Like classes above level 10, level 12. Bounded accuracy system half done. Many spells just irretrievably broken. So um, these are well documented. So we spent a lot of time researching what was broken and how to fix them. But also not afraid to innovate if it fixes what is broken. So some major game systems are done in a different way. Let's follow on to the next point. Post Gygaxian where it needs to be, hyper Gygaxian otherwise. Now there are many things that Gary Gygax got right, like the overall tone of the game, its cooperative, innovative nature, based on the imagination, based on role playing, etc. I don't think he was quite as good in terms of game mechanics. Most of the key game mechanics um, I got from Dave Arneson. And when he tried to introduce a kind of Arneson free IP, he got into problems. It was just endless individual game mechanics. Um, so, there are a few areas where we've kind of tried to get out of that box when um, there are better approaches that are compatible. And I think our main approach is to try and make some of these innovations compatible with the D20 system, particularly degree of success, which is kind of and falling four, which are both very important mechanics in modern cutting edge systems. Equal priority to gaming, simulation, and narrative. Now, you can have hyper simulationist systems that are bad games, and good games that are not very good in terms of simulation. Um, if there's a conflict, narrative comes before gaming, and if there's a conflict, gaming comes before simulation. In that order, that's kind of been my general rule, um, because there are systems that are terrible at simulationism but are good for gaming, like hit points, for example. Um, and the alternatives aren't always very palatable or manageable, like damaged systems that involve bits of your armor falling off or bits of your backpack falling off. We've seen recently, interesting, but or just where you target an arm and chop bits of arms off. Choppy systems. Rules that are cool, not the rule of cool. This is important. People often quote the rule of cool, often because rules are bad. So it's better to have consistent cool rules first before you need to impose the rule of cool. I mean, systems that allow you to slide down banisters and grab chandeliers and so on without having to fudge it. Equally playable at all levels. I think we talked about that in terms of levels. Uh, Cinematic without jumping the shark. People often say cinematic, and often oversell games as being cinematic. Um, I think what it means is during encounters, especially, not just swinging a sword thump. Things happen. And in a tactical game, things can happen. Interesting things can happen. So this is all really to do with the abilities and the interesting things you can do with the abilities. Realistic within the changed reality of a fantasy world. So there are certain aspects of realism that are important. Um, Having run your movement, let's say it's 5 or 6, then not having a bonus action to run another 5 or 6. Is this a creature that can run twice the speed? We don't have bonus actions, by the way. No, they're not. I think Chris Perkins has emphasised that whatever the game mechanics, don't jump the shark in terms of realism. So, although, for example, in Initiative, he's given an example of where everybody's acting at once in the real world, but in the game world, they they do their turn with a bucket of water, then hand it to somebody else and does their turn with a bucket of water. And if you look at the end of it, measure the speed of the bucket of water, it's 4 times the maximum speed of any of the one characters. So um, it's important to, the golden rule of the GM really is not to permit anything that is this physically impossible. Mechanics follow from law. I think this is an important point. Um, there are many game mechanics that are not explained by law, and if they're not, then they will likely be rejected by players. Like in Dungeons and Dragons, there are many times it says you may not choose to, and players will say, "Well, I choose to." If it's not explained, it's not clear. And I think this is something I didn't fully realise until got into the meat of designing the game. In that, if you have to design magic systems, those magic systems have to have a basis in law. Religions have to have a basis in law. There are many classes that do not make sense unless you can ground them in law. So we didn't start out with having our own kind of default planet, default game setting, default game world. But we found we had to really, in order to develop the minimum law, to develop the minimum mechanics. Unapologetically sexy. Um, we don't feel like this is a game designed with PG-12 on the front. That's gone from much of modern systems. Much of the appeal of old school is that they were unapologetically sexy. So put that back in the game. Crunch only where it adds fun, not crunch for its own sake. Perhaps there are some game systems like Pathfinder where it's gone a bit far. Both strategic and tactical. Strategic is important because strategic is how you plan your character over the adventuring day. By adventuring day, we don't mean the kind of 2014 Player's Handbook concept of having a set number of encounters per day. The adventuring day is the time between a long rest and a long rest. So you've got resources over that period. How do you manage your resources over that adventuring day? So it hasn't been taken out of our system. I think taking it out of the 2024 Dungeon Master's Guide, you've lost that concept of strategy, of having to nurse your rations, of having to nurse your torches, the fact that you can only walk so far or carry so much weight of loot out of a dungeon. That strategic side is just as much as important as the tactical side in gaming. Consistent, yep. Balanced, absolutely. Some people say that balance is not important. You can have a first level character playing alongside 10th level characters. Well, to a degree, if it helps the story, but otherwise, you'd find that that first level character can't take part in combat, and the other characters just spend all their time treating them as a baby and concealing them, and that's not very satisfactory. So, broad balance is important. Irreverence, with British ironic humour is important here. Story over grind, which means be able to get on with the story and spend most of your time on the story, not encounters. Get encounters over quickly, not 3 hours. Da 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 da. No hit point slogs, battles of attrition. Rewarding and imaginative role play. It can be rewarding as to avoid a deadly encounter than going headfirst straight in a suicidal way. The way our experience system works is it's to your advantage to avoid encounters. You get to the loot by whatever means, and you get it out. It's perfectly possible, I think. Well, if this is a If this was Baldur's Gate or something, you'd say, well, this is a run where you have no combat. You just go, you fear or sleep or whatever. I mean, you see videos of this. That's a valid tactic. It's hard. It's hard in a tabletop game, but it's a perfectly valid tactic to avoid combat, and it's part of the old school spirit as well. You know, most of the combats you'll face will be deadly, so you need to avoid them. And monsters are pretty deadly in this system. Characters are a bit tougher, particularly at the first 2 or 3 levels, but uh, the enemies are deadly as well. So you need to treat them with extreme caution, unless you've got some form of edge in combat. Rewarding skill. I mean, skill in playing the game. I mean, there's a considerable amount of skill in the game because it's tactical. I mean, the default form is grid-based combat. So, you know, how you position yourself, how different players aid each other, what order in which you use various abilities to wear an enemy down and maximize your chance of scoring a crit is really important. Now, some tactics will work towards some enemies, and other tactics will work against others. And this leads directly into the next point about rewarding teamwork. If you work together, then you're much more likely to achieve a good outcome than if you work apart. I think this is a good lesson from Pathfinder, where teamwork really is rewarded in combat. Taking the pressure off GMs by making monsters easier to run. I mean, been a big push in this direction over the last 15 years or so. Just look at version 3.5 of D&D, where stat blocks were almost unworkably complex. Everything was there, but you know, in terms of multiple attacks and spell casting and so on, oh, you need to be an expert in almost every aspect of the game to run really complex monsters, particularly as those monsters had to make just as many decisions as players. So, you know, trying to give something back to the GM here by making monsters easy to run. Memorable climatic encounters every time, not just hit points, logs, or fests. Using the best practice games play conventions, and again, we've had over the last 10 years a real explosion of indie games, particularly in the Powered by the Apocalypse approach, which has showed us a different and innovative way of playing games. Not always suitable for highly tactical games, but there are many aspects of the game where some of the lessons of that can be um, learned. And that follows on to the next one, which is enabling new kinds of play. Dungeon crawl isn't always appropriate. You might have skirmish games, one party against another, or gladiatorial games, or duels, or um, combat competitions, all kinds of different ways and there are lots of game mechanics in the game, such as parry to defend system, which really are designed for those one-on-one kind of encounters, and perhaps might be dropped when you have more players on the table. And finally, streamable, so which means systems really need to be transparent, so people who are streaming and watching um, um, know what's going on. Oh well, goodbye to our shambling mold there, and back to me. Okay, well that is about it well that is it for today's um, um, for today's video. Thank you very much. In the next few videos, we're going to be talking about classes. The next one will be an overview of the class system of the 10 main classes, and then we're going to do a deep dive into each one of the classes, and in particular, we'll look into the main abilities and distinctive features of each of the classes and how the classes can work together to act as a team. Thank you very much.